Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. You are listening to a show that deals with everything about aging well, and that's all we talk about. Today's topic is a little bit of a departure from the health and wellness and fitness that we always talk about, but I think it is a show that you're all going to want to listen to, and I encourage everybody to not only sit through the whole thing, but share it because this is something that really is relevant to our times. And we talk all the time, all of us, about what's going on in the world today and how can we make it more peaceful. And my guest today, Francesco Da Vinci, is a journalist, a nonviolent activist, public speaker, and documentary film producer. He has a giant list of things to his name, which I'll let you go look up when you see him on his webpage and throughout the show. But he is the author of a book called I Refuse to Kill, which now is in the works of becoming a documentary. Around his writing and film work, Francesco also gives talks that pay tribute to the conscientious objectors, past and present. So today, not only are we talking about his book and the upcoming documentary, but also what it means to be a conscientious objector. Welcome, Francesco.
Thank you.
Now, your book reads part history, somewhat of a memoir, a lot of intrigue, almost like a novel. I was riveted the whole time. You
Thank you.
tell the story of how you became a conscientious objector and the impact it had on the nation and the Vietnam War during the 60s. You know, we look at the 60s. I was born in the 60s. So for a lot of people, that's very, very far away. And something you mentioned, a thread throughout the book, is how did we lose that place and time where we cared so much about the future of our country and the safety and the wellness and the happiness of all of our citizens. I think that's a part of this before we even get to how violence doesn't work. It never has, it never will. And I just have so many questions for you about this. But I'd like to start. Can we get a short history of the Vietnam War and why we got involved? I mean, at the
Sure.
time, President Kennedy was famously not in favor of this.
This is true.
Mhm.
You're exactly right. In fact, there were some humorous exchanges with President Kennedy and diplomats. For example, George Ball, when he came to President Kennedy and he said, we might need 300,000 troops in Vietnam. This is President Kennedy, right? 1961 through 63. And this is a quote from President Kennedy. Well, George, you're supposed to be one of the smartest guys in town, but you're crazier than hell. That'll never happen. So Kennedy did feel it was a mistake from the beginning. And he said, if South Vietnamese are going to fight, we'll support them, but they should do their fighting for themselves. He would not have gotten us deeper into Vietnam.
So, what were you seeing as you came of age that shaped your thoughts, throughout your life to become a conscientious objector? Because you were a teenager in the 60s.
I
So,
was.
you're probably going to go back even to the late 50s. What was going on that led you down this path?
Well, they used to call the 50s the sleepy 50s because, it was like conformity. And then the 60s with President Kennedy, he spoke specifically to my generation. He told us to get involved. That was a huge shift from the 50s. And I was at the inauguration as a teenager of President Kennedy, who I looked up to. And he encouraged us with the Peace Corps and with things, be of service to others, make your country better, and you'll feel better about yourself. And we've lost that spirit and it needs to come back.
Can you share the story about looking out the window at President Kennedy?
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lifetime memory. Since I was a teenager at the inauguration of President Kennedy, I was watching the inaugural parade from the second floor of a hotel. And when Kennedy was getting close in his car with Jacqueline sitting beside him, was an open convertible, my buddy said, hey, let's yell to the president when he gets close. And I thought that was brilliant. So together we went 1, 2, 3, and we went, hey, Jack. And President Kennedy looked up, he picked up his top hat and he waved it to us.
Oh, what a
We
wonderful
never forgot it.
I can
Like,
imagine.
like I said, he inspired us. That was the important thing, to be of service.
So the you talk a lot in your book about your parents not having the same view. Was that a sign of the times?
Well, let me qualify that, because
Okay.
they were all for my stand as a conscientious objector and peacemaker philosophically. It's just that they didn't want to see their son go to prison.
Okay.
Because when you apply as a CO, that's at the risk of prison. That's why it always bugs me when people say it seems like the easy way out. It's just the opposite. You tear up your student deferment when you apply as a CO, and you're risking prison from the outset. So my parents were totally on board for the philosophy of nonviolence, but they didn't want to see me go to prison. So they advocated that I flee to Canada with my fiancée, or I get a good lawyer and fake my way out of the draft. And I refused both options.
Okay. That so you stood in the face of it. You faced it head on. You didn't say, I'm going to run away, I'm going to break my leg, I'm going to try to find a college.
Bone spurs.
So again, we're talking from hindsight, Francesco. I mean, everything we know now, and triple whammy, quadruple with all the news and everything just is in our face all the time. Like there was a certain shroud of secrecy at the time surrounding these things. How, I'm going to divert just a little bit.
Okay.
How were conscientious objectors viewed as opposed to what they called the draft dodgers? Again, I don't like that term, but that's what was used at the time for people who ran away or used school or faked an ailment to get out of going.
I'm
How were
so
those
glad.
viewed?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's one of the reasons I wrote the whole book. I Refuse to Kill was written as a tribute to COs and to explain what is a CO and why are they not draft dodgers. A CO is somebody because their conscience refuses to kill. Hence the title, I Refuse to Kill. But COs in the public's mind have been linked to the draft, as you put it, head on. They state their philosophical beliefs against violence, and if they're not recognized by their draft board, which you have for your...
I'm sorry we got kicked off for a minute, but let's just pick
Okay.
up where we left off because the
Where should
recording.
I pick up?
Um, uh, you were talking about
The
sharing the
differences?
difference between how draft dodgers were viewed as as how conscientious objectors were viewed, and the background.
30 to 50,000 young people went to Canada to avoid the draft. But in total, this is how unpopular the war was. 600,000 illegally evaded the draft. But the COs went through the system, they stated their beliefs, and they willingly went to prison if they weren't recognized by their draft board. So that's why I feel it's time we honor these brave individuals who took that stand.
Absolutely. Um, how are the COs viewed by the military? Then and now. Let's talk about then and talk about now.
Well, I would say then and now with suspicion, because, it's a whole different way of thinking too. The CO, as Einstein said, question everything. The COs really mirror that. They get us thinking, as Pete Seeger was fond of saying. And they question the glorification of war. We have to deal with the reality that we have a violent culture. That's the way to deal with it. If we recognize it, we can't go in denial about it. We certainly have a violent, and we need to transform that and hopefully make it more nonviolent and humanistic. That's what it's all about.
Now, you're talking about facing prison. So let's look at. So was it legal during the Vietnam War to declare yourself as a CO, a conscientious objector?
Yes, it certainly was. And there were about 170,000 COs that were recognized as sincere conscientious objectors. So yes, it was legal. And the United Nations has advocated through their Human Rights Division that everyone in every country should have the human right to say no to war, to say, I refuse to kill.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it was legal. However, again, like we were saying, many people took the other routes to illegally avoid the draft.
I studied this time period extensively, and I too want to write books. So I was 7 years old in 1968. I turned 8 the end of 1968. Vietnam was going on and we knew about it, but I was obviously too young to absorb, and I don't come from a military family. I come from a pro-military family, meaning that our family supported the troops, the actual troops, not so much the war, but supported those men when they went and when they came home. So there isn't a clear picture of where Americans stood. Every movie I watch, documentary, book I read, you had gung-ho soldiers, draftees that didn't want to go but felt they had to. People were afraid to go to prison. I guess the fear of going to Canada or anywhere else, the fear is that you'll never see your family again. And then on top of that, there were men and some women who were volunteering or working as nurses, came home to abuse and ended up with severe physical and emotional traumas, repercussions, where others came home and went on with their lives. Seemingly okay with it all. So you had soldiers that came home, made a life for themselves with injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, shrapnel in their legs, whatever it might be. And others came home and couldn't function again for the rest of their lives. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that war is essentially killing, and trauma, that's what is hidden in the PR and the recruitment of other people to go into the military and go into war. And you're talking about really very, very young men, some people, boy men. You're talking that the majority of those killed in Vietnam were in just barely beyond teenager.
Right.
So this is something we have to recognize. And I want to point out that for the COs and the people, I formed a peace group, as you know, and we worked with many soldiers that came home. Most didn't want to talk about their trauma, and we respected that. Of course, it's understandable. But they had such respect for what we were doing because they went in for idealistic reasons. And then they turned against the war. They had misgivings and more misgivings. In fact, the whole nation started to turn, especially by 1970. It was so bad at that point that there were many documented cases where soldiers were killing their officers because they were gung-ho officers who wanted to send them into hopeless battle situations. And Nixon was still prolonging the war, saying we're winding down, but he was escalating the bombing at the same time. So, these soldiers were used and they were aware of it, and they joined our peace group. And it was a beautiful thing to see, Patricia, to see the students and the soldiers. That didn't make the press, though.
Right.
And the stories of like students spitting on soldiers were exaggerated to make a point and keep the students and the soldiers from working together against the war. So a lot of it was propaganda also.
So I can remember, even as a little kid, the newsreels. Does anyone know what that word is anymore? That would come on TV, and they were talking about they would have movies of active combat. Is that the right word? Active combat on TV. Do you think that desensitized us as a country towards war?
Absolutely desensitized us. And yet, the violence desensitized us because we get shock resistant to it. But on the other hand, it was first televised war, and it woke us up to the realities of war because, in the press, they were having daily body counts, as you know.
Yes.
And, it's like we're supposed to cheer, the higher the body count. A lot of people still don't realize we lost 58,000 young American men, and several million Asians were killed during this war. And you have to ask yourself, for what? So TV played a big role, as you may remember when Walter Cronkite, the famous newsman, went to Vietnam. At that point, the Americans were divided about 50-50. And a big factor was his report, this is an unwinnable war, and at best a stalemate, and we should get out as soon as possible. So TV definitely have a significant role in the turning of the war, as well as the young people who were out in the streets. Let's give them credit. From 1965 to 1975, they were out in the streets getting beaten and shot at. And they, as Howard Zinn, the historian, said, they were the significant factor of bringing this war to a halt.
That was my next question. How what role did the radical activism of that time play out in the future for ending the Vietnam War, and today, quite honestly? I know it's a long trajectory, but
Right. Well, I'll go back to the time
yeah,
travel and start with
yes.
then. But when you say radical activism, I want to be clear that 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 word has been used as a weapon, that phrase as a weapon by the press to scare the public about nonviolent activism.
No, I think it's the perfectly appropriate word, and I'm going to back you on that word
Yeah,
forever.
thank you.
Yes.
And because really radical
Radical
means getting
changing,
to the
radical
root of
thought,
something.
right? Radical
Exactly.
activism, and we use a term with some of my colleagues about radical aging, right?
Okay.
Is really
I can see
taking
that.
the bull by the horns and figuring out how to age the very best you can. It's the same with
Yeah.
activism. You're doing to bring it to the very best outcome. Mm-hmm.
That's it. You got to deal with things and move on and
Yeah.
proactive. So, where were we with that now? I forgot
We were
now.
talking about the trajectory of the radical activism.
Radical activism.
Okay, so if
Yeah.
if you don't even want to use that word, the activism, the bringing the awareness in, especially like you say, 1968, 69, and 70, to the reality of what was going on. How did that play out to turn the tide of the wars, or the attitude towards the war in the American public?
It was a building process. Now you got to remember there was so much hate. When a war breaks out, we automatically, Pavlovian instinct, we rally around the president. We don't really examine the merits or, the problems with getting into a conflict. We just rally around the president. And throughout our history, many times the president has bypassed Congress illegally. So that was a building movement. When I formed a peace group, it started with 4 people in San Diego, and it grew to 250 people. And that because there was such a hunger, but it was a transition. My best buddy was serving in Vietnam in the Navy, and we had that respectful differences reconciliation going. But he was gung-ho from the beginning, and then he had a shift. And by 1970, it was a major shift for the whole country. So it was a building thing. You had to make the sacrifice, put your body on the line and be out at those marches. Today, I encourage today's generation, live your beliefs. I went from bystander. I didn't just have this burning desire to make a difference and be of service. It started with President Kennedy, but was an attitude in my mind, and I wasn't taking the action. And here my buddy was serving in Vietnam, following his sense of duty. And I said to my parents, it's time that I follow my sense of duty, or I'm a hypocrite to everything I believe in.
So you've made this your life's work, and you alluded to this earlier, but you found that soldiers were disenchanted when they got back, or maybe even while they were serving there. There was a documentary, and I'm slipping on the name, I'll look it up for you, with Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland, and they said there was 500,000 active soldiers who were against the war while they were serving. When they did the numbers, they said it was astronomical, and this information never came out then. So, here we are. You're fighting for this cause, in a sense. Fighting, I don't even want to use that word. You're standing up for a cause, and there's people who are actually fighting and not wanting to be there. So when they came back, they joined your, was it like shifting
Nonviolent
sides?
action. Was it what?
Yeah, your Nonviolent Action Network. What did they actually like shift sides? Was it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But that, as you mentioned, it had started earlier. It starts with the mental process. And many of them had been recruited, and they saw the huge discrepancy between the way the recruiters describe life in the military to the realities there in Vietnam. So there was a huge shift. You're right. It was abrupt. And, you got to admire these guys for making that dramatic change. And they took a lot of heat, like COs were taking a lot of heat. In the military context, you can imagine it was intensified. Many of them ended up in a brig, and some of them joined our peace group. And I was so proud to serve with them, and in our sense of duty, serving peace.
I'm Patricia Greenberg. You're listening to Eat Well, Live Well, Age Well, and where we talk about all things aging well. This is my chance to tell you to please subscribe to my channel, Patricia Greenberg, on YouTube, and this will be out on many, many different platforms where you can look this up. And please look up Francesco Da Vinci. He is the author of I Refuse to Kill, My Path to Nonviolent Action in the 1960s. And Francesco's also developing a documentary based on this book and his story of how he made history by becoming a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. This is a great book also for youngsters today. It's a timeless topic that we want to keep talking about and bringing people into the consciousness of making the world a better place through ending war. Francesco, this is probably, again, what led you, and I wanted to ask you this earlier, but I'm going to do. How did you deal with the aftermath of losing JFK, Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, all very young men taking a nonviolent approach to peace? People don't realize President Kennedy became was he 43?
In the
Right?
40s, definitely.
Early mid 40s. Martin Luther King was Jr. was 36 when he was killed.
Yeah, they were all young.
And Bobby Kennedy was in his 40s. I mean, this is young people.
Well, for the 60s generation, we experienced the death of our heroes.
Mhm.
All our hopes were pinned. I wouldn't say all our hopes, but
Right.
they inspired us, our main sources of inspiration. I'll start with President Kennedy. I was, it was 1963, and we just couldn't believe that it happened.
Right.
Because we're so inspired to better the country. So it's a hammer to the heart. And then, Dr. King, 1968 was my graduating year. And symbolic of the times, I was working for Bobby Kennedy for president, and I spent my college graduation day from the University of Maryland. Instead of getting my diploma, I was at Bobby's funeral. And I was just overwrought with emotion. Dr. King had been killed just months before, and he was supposed to attend the Poor People's Campaign. So I went to the Poor People's Campaign to support social justice and the call for more civil rights. And, we just felt disbelief. And then there was this feeling of being burned out, especially Bobby was our last hope after Dr. King. Our last practical hope. And we all felt, I was watching TV when he won the California primary. I was watching with my fiancée. We turned off the TV just as he announced it's on to Chicago.
Yeah.
And then the next morning, we learned that he was shot. So at that point, that's when I personally felt burned out and reached a crucial decision. Do I give up now, or do I keep going despite how devastated I am? And I decided to keep going. And then I attended Bobby's funeral. And I thought the best way I can honor him is to continue the activism as he spoke, create ripples of kindness that spread out.
Francesco, that brings me to really applaud you for taking grief and channeling grief into good. This is not something a lot of people do. They feel grief, they become devastated, whether it's personal or what's going on in the world. And we are feeling that 1,000-fold right now, and taking that and using it as a way to better the world instead of saying, you know what, there's nothing I can do, everybody's gone, it's too late. You took that grief and I guess anger to some degree and all the emotions that you feel and used it to good. I can't tell you how much I admire you for doing that, and what an inspiration that is for other people.
I appreciate that very much. It was hurt to anger. And, it's one thing, to feel that devastation and then you feel better about yourself. One of the beautiful things about your work, I've got to compliment you, Patricia, is that you get people introspecting. It all starts in the mind. If you look at war and you look at peace and what our possibilities are to be better people, to create a better country and a better planet, it all starts in the mind. And that's one of the things you're, inspiring other people to think about. And that's what happened with me. I did that introspection and I said, I'm not content as a bystander, and I'm not going to let this keep me down. And we inspire each other. That's what it's all about. Start with yourself don't get immobilized, don't give up,
Right.
and then spread your own self-fulfillment with the fulfillment and being of service to other people.
It's okay to take that grief space, but not to stay in it.
Yeah, you can take a step backwards to regroup. We all need it sometimes. I remember when I taught 2 years, it was a rough 9th and 10th grade. I would often do that with my students because I cared so much about them. And then I'd go forward.
Something we share is you mentioned you're a space nerd in your book. I'm a frustrated astronaut. I would have gone every time I go visit the Space Center. I've gone to Houston, I've gone to Florida, and when I get in the capsule, I have a panic attack. I couldn't bear being hurtled into space, but I'm intrigued by the whole program. You mentioned in your book, just again, it opened the world to a whole another level of possibilities that you can be limitless. You can do anything you want with your life. You can go to the moon, right?
Right.
And that should have changed the world, I think, in the way that it was meant to, but it didn't. And you expressed that you've developed a friendship at that time with Neil Armstrong when they landed on the moon. Again, that should have been the defining moment. What happened? The war raged on.
Yeah.
People continued to fight. Racism.
Well, I'll start with my being a space nerd. I always followed. So one day I got the chance that if there was anybody in the world that I wanted to meet more, it was Neil Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a set photographer. I used to be a celebrity portrait photographer, and I was a photographer for NBC. And Neil was appearing on the show, and I took his pictures, and we corresponded. We became best buddies for over 20 years,
Wow.
Corresponding every month by email. So that was another inspiration, And President Kennedy, he said, we're going to get to the moon. The funny thing was, nobody knew how we were going to do that at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these things, Patricia, are self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's another that speaks to the power of positive thinking and persistence and taking action. But what I was going to say about the moon landing that's very important is there was a huge irony because as much as I admire Neil and the whole space program and the 400,000 employees of NASA that made that possible, not to mention our imagination,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
They took this plaque that said, "We came in peace for all mankind." And, ironically, there's the Vietnam War raging at home, and we take this plaque of peace to the moon, that's barren. And to me, it was almost symbolic of like the moon could represent the logical extension of war uncontrolled and the danger of nuclear weapons. This is what Earth could become if we don't wake up,
Right.
Smell the coffee, and start disarmament in a serious way. So this is part of what we have to address. And so I have this ambivalence. I recognize this tremendous accomplishment. We're taking our baby steps into the cosmos, right, for humanity. And at the same time, we still haven't learned how to live on Earth.
There's a belief about expanding our minds and going out into space and becoming, sounds so 60s and woo-woo, a universal oneness. And yet there's people who really don't believe that this is where I think a stumbling block in humanity and mankind. There's people that just believe my race is superior or my land is better or that's a whole nother nut for us to crack. And it's so sad to me that this is still going on. You stated in the beginning of the book, and I'm going to quote, "Today's youth, by and large, want to live up to the challenge set forth by Congressman John Lewis to continue the unfinished revolution, namely to fight for social justice and peace through nonviolent action." John Lewis was a hero to me, and so sad that he's no longer here. Did he step into Dr. King's shoes?
Absolutely. What a role model. And that's one of the things we're lacking today is more role models that take the stand for social justice, for peace through nonviolence. You're going against the grain to do those things, but in the long run, those are the things that are going to move humanity forward.
So where are we at now with that?
Well, I hope springs eternal. I think one step at a time. And this for your viewers, what I would say it's important not to give up and to be positive and persistent, because a lot of what we do is a self-fulfilling prophecy. America can be better. We can better ourselves. And, when we help others, we're bettering ourselves at the same time. A lot of people will look at the overall picture and they'll get immobilized and say, what can one person do? Alice Walker has a beautiful quote, and she said, the way so many people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any.
Right.
But really, we do have the power. Our whole country is built on the power of we the people. So we need to assert that. And we start individually. Let's start with just in your own microcosm. All of us can show random acts of kindness, right?
Right.
We can go out into the world with that, even at that level, and then it spreads out. So let's not give up. Let's be positive, encourage each other, and spread the love.
Absolutely. Now, do you think the military serves a purpose now today?
Yes, but let me qualify that.
Okay.
I feel that Eisenhower had a prophetic warning about the military industrial complex, and I think we still haven't addressed it, and America needs to do that. The military is working with the large corporations at the expense of we the people, and we need to spend more on we the people, not just monetary, but have the attitude. When you do a budget, it reflects your personal values.
Right.
And if you look at our values, the people needs are way, way under. So we need to reevaluate our priorities and address the military industrial complex. There's been so many billions of dollars of cost overruns relatively just unchecked, like blank check. And meanwhile, you have poverty, you have problems with civil rights, you have problems with, why not invest in, for example, like a Department of Peace in the president's cabinet and have somebody aggressively go for nonviolent alternatives in war, put those billions of dollars that we waste on war and put them into people needs. Be of service here and abroad. That's what America's respected for in the long run.
Francesco, I want to read a piece from your letter to the reader at the end of the book. If I want peace, I cannot kill for it. If I want love, I cannot hate for it. If I want freedom, I cannot enslave for it. The means cannot be sacrificed for the ends. How can we continue to get this message out and eliminate war?
Well, let's each of us start with ourselves. Gandhi said, I will not wait for the whole society to come to my point of view. I'll straight away make a beginning with myself. And for my own personal journey, it's been holding myself accountable when I stray off that. And the central tenet, perhaps, of nonviolence is making the way you do something just as important as what you want. Make the means harmonious with the ends. So let's each of us apply that in our daily lives, trying to make our words, our thoughts, and our actions harmonious. And that's really one of the things that's reflected in your work. And I appreciate that. Let's start with ourselves and then go out. The Dalai Lama also has that message. He says, don't look just to external things to fix things. Let's each of us start with ourselves and work that way. So we're all participating and active. Better ourselves, be of service to others.
Francesco, as you get older, would you say that you are more or less of an activist now?
No, I don't get older. No kidding.
And how important do you think it is for the seniors to get involved in these causes?
Oh, I think it's very important. I think, your mind stays alert, and especially if you believe in yourself, and what you're doing, that's contagious. When you're unhappy, that's contagious, So my motto has been dream, believe the dream, make it happen, have your own goals, whatever they may be, and then use love as the foundation. So I'm going to break it down real quick and summarize it. Love starts with yourself. You got to like yourself or you're not good for a relationship. If you hate yourself, that's what you have to give. Second, love whatever you're doing. If you're still working, love your work, and that'll show to other people and yourself. You'll be happier. And the last one is, you be of service to other people. You feel better about yourself and you're helping other people. It's good karma. So that ends up where you love life.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. And that's what I would recommend for today and getting older. Stay active, spread the love.
I want to add to that because, again, this is all I do now, is that you have nothing to lose going forward. You know, the things you thought that you would be, your work would be jeopardized, your relationships would be jeopardized, you wouldn't be respected by your peers, the PTA will kick you off the board, or people at work. You know what? None of that matters anymore. What's most important is that, like you say, you love yourself and you exude that love and give back to the world. Whatever level, at any point that you can do it, there's nothing to be afraid of anymore, right? And we live in so much fear as young people of how the world is going to treat us. As you get older, hopefully you can let that go.
Feel the fear and go forward.
Right, right. What's it? The only thing to fear is fear itself. It's a corny expression, but my father used to use it all the time. Francesco, I want to thank you so much, A, for your bravery, to and your insight and wisdom supporting a nonviolent approach to peace worldwide. It's been such a delight to talk to you. We're going to have to do this again, continue to talk and keep this movement going. And I just, for more information about Francesco Da Vinci and to buy the book, go to his website, www.irefusetokill.com. Francesco, the best to you about the book and the documentary, and I'm so looking forward to when it's going to come out and we can share this information with the world. Any more thoughts before we go?
Yes, one thing I'd like to add, if anybody out there gets the book, I will personally sign it to you. You just go to irefusetokill.com.
Okay.
My email there, you send it to me, I'll sign it to you.
Okay, perfect. Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
And thank you all for listening. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for our engaging discussions on all things aging well.